Okay, so I think we'll just make a start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Wu. I'm the director of the Evidence Synthesis Group at the Complex Review Synthesis Unit. It's really good to see so many of you joining us today. I hope you're sitting in a relatively cool room in front of a fan with nice cool drinks next to you. So today we are very chuffed to have our own Dr. Evi Germeni, who's going to give us the webinar today. Now, Evi is a reader in qualitative methods for health research based at the University of Glasgow here. She is also a steering committee member for the NIHR Methodology Incubator and co-lead the qualitative work stream. So she's very committed to the developing and implementing qualitative methods. Now, she has a specific interest in evidence synthesis, and her work in evidence synthesis spans across primary qualitative research to qualitative evidence synthesis. So she has done qualitative evidence synthesis across a diverse range of disease and health areas and in different contexts. Now, I'm a huge supporter of qualitative work, and over the years I've been learning from Evi, so it is really exciting to see so many of you also interested. Now, alongside qualitative evidence synthesis, Evi's really interested in the challenge on how to meaningfully incorporate patient and public perspectives into decision making and have genuine integration of lived experience. And I think today's talk, Evi, is drawing on one of the projects that we did a few years ago on a mixed method evidence synthesis on lifestyle interventions in people with learning disabilities. So it was quite a complex piece of work with realist synthesis and component network meta-analysis, but also there was huge element of incorporating patient and public experience and perspective as well. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Evi's going to say. So Evi, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Olivia, and many thanks to everyone taking the time to attend today's webinar. Let me see. Oops, okay. So yes, what I will be talking about today is not actually an ongoing project, but it is work that we completed some time ago, a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, in academia, we tend to jump from one project to the other, and taking the time and space needed to reflect on what went well or what could have gone better seems like a luxury. So I decided to use today's presentation as an opportunity to reflect on the rather unconventional or non-traditional form that PPI took in a realist synthesis that we conducted, focusing, as Olivia said, on lifestyle modification interventions for adults with intellectual disabilities. I'm not going to talk at all about the results of this project. These have been published already in the Journal of Intellectual Disability Research, and I was actually very glad to see that this paper is now a top downloaded and top cited paper in the journal. And there is also the NIHR report, of course, which presents in extensive detail the methods and results of this work. So, realist synthesis have become very popular lately. In the diagram, you can see that the number of PubMed publications using realist review or realist synthesis in the title is almost 140. Was almost 140 last year, compared to nearly 40 10 years ago. The reason why realist reviews have become so popular over the last few years is perhaps that they extend beyond the mere question of what works to providing more comprehensive explanations of how interventions work, for whom they work, as well as why they may work in particular circumstances and not in others. For those of you who are less familiar with realist synthesis, in the slide you can see some of the characteristics of realist reviews compared to traditional systematic reviews. Most importantly, a realist perspective assumes that an intervention may lead to different outcomes in different contexts due to different mechanisms, which is typically expressed in short form as context mechanism outcome configurations. The relationships between context mechanism and outcome are typically conceptualized as a program theory, which expresses how the intervention is expected to lead to its effects, both intended and unintended. Another very important feature of realist synthesis is that the extent of stakeholder involvement throughout the process is high. This means that realist reviews often rely on the involvement of non-researcher contributors, such as policymakers, experts, patients, and the public, both in establishing the truthfulness of emerging findings, in validating, in a way, emerging findings, and in dissemination activities. So, realist synthesis is characterized as an inherently stakeholder-driven approach to evidence synthesis. However, available evidence suggests that stakeholder involvement, and in particular patient and public involvement, PPI, can easily get lost in realist reviews, as its exact nature and impact might be difficult to disentangle. Also, what we also know is that involvement in research has traditionally been more difficult for certain groups than others. One such group is people with intellectual disabilities who have historically been excluded from research, both as participants and as co-researchers, on the grounds of their cognitive impairment. During the 90s, the disability movement, of course, challenged traditional views about the involvement of service users in research with the powerful motto that I'm sure you've all heard, nothing about us without us. And although this indeed led to an increase in opportunities for research participation and perhaps a greater appreciation of the added value that lived experience can bring to research, many intellectual disability research projects still lack systematic involvement of PPI contributors, and of those that do incorporate PPI activities, reporting on the practice and impact of involvement remains limited. So those of you that come from the UK know that involving patients and the public in health and social care research is now a prerequisite for most funding bodies, including the National Institute for Health and Care Research, the NIHR, which funded us to conduct, as part of a larger mixed methods evidence synthesis, a realist review of lifestyle modification interventions targeting unhealthy behaviors in adults with intellectual disabilities. In the slide, you can see a much younger version of me, I think, and all the co-applicants in this project. We had a very multidisciplinary team, which included researchers with expertise in evidence synthesis, qualitative research, intellectual disabilities, public health, and behavior change, as well as a PPI co-investigator and co-applicant who had an intellectual disability and ensured all aspects of the study respected the needs, abilities, and wants of people with intellectual disabilities. In addition, a PPI group was set up at the outset of the project and was consulted at regular intervals to provide input and feedback on emerging findings and dissemination activities. Our PPI group consisted of 4 adults with mild intellectual disabilities, 2 male and 2 female, plus the PPI co-investigator and a female staff member who supported the group during the project. All involvement was through a non-profit organization which is controlled by people with intellectual disabilities. So in this very busy slide, you can see it represents a snapshot of an overview of the patient and public involvement. So we thought it would be very crucial to involve people with lived experience from the very beginning of the project, even actually before the project got selected for funding. So in order to inform the development of our funding application, we held an initial consensus roundtable meeting with all PPI members and the support worker. They confirmed that modifying unhealthy lifestyle behaviors among adults with intellectual disabilities was an important area of research and agreed on the priority risk behaviors, which were smoking, alcohol consumption, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and sedentary behaviors. Although they mentioned that alcohol consumption was not really relevant to their lives, they could understand how it could affect other adults with intellectual disabilities and felt that it should be included in the review due to its significant health risks. And we also discussed ways to optimize their involvement in the project. They informed us that they would prefer not to have a carer to represent them, as they felt that in some circumstances, carers can overpower their voice and enforce their opinion as that of adults with intellectual disabilities. So we agreed that the support worker would take on the role of a project buddy, supporting the members' involvement in the study, as they had done already in the past successfully. And this would essentially entail briefing them before the meetings, 1 week before the meetings, and being available to answer any questions after. So during the 2-year project, we held in total 4 PPI meetings at key stages of the reviews. All meetings took place online due to COVID-19 restrictions and lasted approximately 1 hour each. Meetings were facilitated by myself. I led the realist review component of the project, and a researcher with substantial experience in intellectual disabilities research. The first meeting started with an overview of the project and the role of the PPI group. And then we had an open discussion about PPI members' experiences and views of lifestyle modification interventions, which fed directly into our initial draft program theory, developed based on preliminary scoping searches of key literature. In the second meeting, we presented the draft context mechanism outcome configurations to the group in an accessible format using visual aids and concise descriptions. We explained how this had been developed, and we highlighted how input from the PPI group had been considered and integrated. The third meeting was conducted upon completion of our systematic review, which helped us further develop our program theory on the basis of a broad and diverse body of literature, taking into account qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. The group provided further feedback on emerging findings, which allowed us to finalize our program theory, ensuring that this had maximum relevance to the lives of adults with intellectual disabilities. The last meeting focused on planning our dissemination event, which included presentations of the results from the PPI members, as well as a drama performance conducted by adults with intellectual disabilities. As I already described, PPI in our case was mediated by a support worker who assumed various, often conflicting roles throughout the project. Educator, increasing researchers' knowledge on how to best interact with the PPI group. Interpersonal mediator, promoting trust between the research team and the PPI members. As well as system mediator, ensuring efficient use of time and keeping the PPI group to the project's agenda. And although she influenced the power dynamics of the relationship, and clearly the input that the group provided, she remained invisible throughout the project in the sense that she was not named as a contributor in the funding application or any of the resulting publications. So, for the needs of this presentation, I was thinking whether we could extend the realist logic that underpinned our evidence synthesis to the PPI itself, treating mediated PPI not as a procedural feature of the project, but rather as an intervention in itself. And there are actually two reasons to do so. First, I believe that if realist thinking is appropriate for unpacking the complexity of lifestyle modification interventions in adults with intellectual disabilities, then it is also appropriate for unpacking the complexity of involvement practices that shape what we conclude about them. Second, doing so, I am hoping to move beyond the descriptive account of what the support worker did to a more analytical or reflective stance of how and why each role produced its effects on the synthesis, including effects that we did not anticipate. So I therefore came up with three context mechanism outcome configurations for mediated PPI, each corresponding to one of the roles that the support worker assumed. So in the context of no prior experience of involving people with intellectual disabilities in a realist synthesis, the support worker acted as an educator, expanding the researcher's communicative repertoire and making the meetings more accessible for the PPI group. So as I said, some members of our team had extensive experience working with people with intellectual disabilities, while others brought to the table methodological expertise. None of us had previously, though, involved adults with intellectual disabilities in an evidence synthesis, and I'm actually curious to hear later on if anyone from the audience has done so. So when the project got funding, the researchers who facilitated the PPI meetings, received training on how to create easy-read documents. And all meeting documentation, including the agenda and any pre-reads, were circulated to the PPI group in an easy-read format 2 weeks in advance, as agreed at our initial consensus roundtable meeting. Here you can see some examples of the materials that we used in our PPI meetings. A pre-read, the post-meeting feedback form, and an agenda. However, working with our PPI contributors involved several other accessibility considerations, as you can understand, including pace of conversation, language use, the duration of the meetings, that were not embedded in our standard meeting practice. So drawing on accumulated practice knowledge from working with the same individuals over a prolonged period of time, the support worker was able to recalibrate researcher behavior in real time, prompting plain language reformulation of questions and key concepts, advising on the pacing of the meetings, signaling when energy was flagging, and requesting short breaks on behalf of the members. This made the meetings more accessible for the PPI group, and it also expanded the researchers' communicative repertoire and skill set over the course of the project. Also in the context of asymmetry in social, professional, and experiential worlds, the support worker acted as an interpersonal mediator, facilitating the creation of a safe space where PPI members could actively contribute to the program theory. PPI members and researchers occupied different social, professional, and experiential worlds, rendering the creation of a safe space where individuals could open up and freely share their views, potentially challenging perhaps. The support worker drew on an existing relationship of trust with the PPI members and acted as a human icebreaker, building rapport and facilitating relationship building across the two communities. Moreover, in a case where tension emerged, she was able to de-escalate heightened emotions and resolve the situation before it surfaced as conflict. Specifically, during a meeting in which we were discussing potential ways for disseminating the review findings, I asked whether using comics would be a good idea, but this landed badly with a group who perceived the use of comics as patronizing and talked about it with visible frustration. The support worker intervened, reaffirming the group's views on comics and animation, while going on to ask about the activities that they had organized in a previous successful dissemination event. As a result of the support workers' interpersonal mediator role, I believe that PPI members were able to engage with the program theory at a level of safety that direct researcher to contributor engagement perhaps might not have achieved. The group's contribution, especially in the broader behavioral pathways and influences of our program theory, was very important. They talked extensively, for instance, about safety concerns that they had and explained how this may deter people from engaging in healthy behavior, something that is reflected in our final program theory. We also talked a lot about the fact that we didn't identify in our systematic review a lot of studies related to smoking and drinking among people with intellectual disabilities. And they explained how sometimes the same safety concerns that limit healthy behaviors, such as physical activity, can also limit unhealthy behaviors, such as drinking and smoking. In particular, they thought that the lower rates of smoking and drinking in people with intellectual disabilities could be due to safety concerns relating to the environments where these behaviors typically happen. For example, people with intellectual disabilities may feel unsafe going to pubs or bars, or, as they said, they could even be denied access, as others may perceive them as drunk due to balance problems, for instance, associated with cerebral palsy. In a context of work conducted with institutional timeframes and processes, the support worker acted as a system mediator, keeping the PPI group to the project's agenda and milestones. We all know that funded projects sit with institutional timeframes and processes that sometimes make conflict with the principles and logic of PPI work. And it is also true that PPI groups also operate within their own constraints, including limited budgets and competing commitments of their members. So in our case, the support worker was responsible for setting the dates of the PPI meetings in collaboration with the researchers and ensuring the presence of all members, talking through the agenda and points of discussion ahead of the meeting with each member individually, and gathering the group's feedback post-meeting. Given that, as I explained, time for PPI input was limited and pre-specified, we had like 4 one-hour meetings across the duration of the project. Keeping the discussions focused on the agenda items was crucial for the effective delivery of the project. Yet as the project progressed and the PPI members became more accustomed to the researchers, they started opening more about their own personal experiences and things that really mattered to them. Sometimes their accounts were quite lengthy and detailed, but not always directly relevant to the scope of the realist review. For instance, a member talked extensively about their experience of anorexia. In these cases, the support worker helped the researchers steer the conversation back to the project's agenda, ensuring that available time is used efficiently and that PPI input can be analytically integrated. And indeed, the project delivered against its milestones without the PPI process becoming a delivery risk. However, the whole work of keeping the PPI group to the project's agenda also entailed a subtle paradox. The realist synthesis was indeed responsive to what the PPI group generated within its agenda, but not or less so to the broader thoughts and experiences of the PPI group, which in retrospect might have led to valuable insights if we had pursued them further. At the beginning of the presentation, I said that I was very happy to see that our realist review was a top-cited and top-downloaded paper and that the academic community embraced this work. Of course, I'm even happier to know after completion of the project that the PPI members, at least based on feedback that they gave us, enjoyed it, enjoyed being part of this project. They enjoyed taking part in the dissemination activities, and they said that they felt respected and listened to, and that they thought that it was extremely important that they got involved in shaping the project from before it even got selected for funding. I would like to finish this presentation with some final thoughts and points for discussion. I know probably you might have questions for me, but I would like to share a few further thoughts that I have regarding this work. And especially for those who are undertaking PPI in evidence synthesis. A thing that I was thinking when I was preparing this presentation is whether existing reporting guidelines for PPI, such as GRIP2, for instance, are suited to capture the complexities of mediated PPI. And another obvious question is whether the formal recognition of the mediator, of the support worker in this case, as a contributor in the project, including co-authorship and named acknowledgement in funding applications, is required now that the role of PPI in health and social care research is expanding, and how this might shift the power dynamics. It has been suggested in the literature that research roles should also be negotiated for support workers working with people with intellectual disabilities because their assistance may be needed during the PPI sessions. But the added challenge here is to try and minimize the support workers' input as much as possible, as they may form a pattern to speak on behalf of the person with intellectual disability. Indeed, especially in our first meeting, I remember that the support worker was trying exactly to break the ice because the PPI members were were a bit quiet. So she frequently said, "I don't want to put words in your mouth, but didn't we discuss this last week and you told me that?" Obviously, she was feeling as well this tension that she didn't want to speak on behalf of the members, but she was trying also to act exactly as an interpersonal mediator, as I said. Yeah, so I would really be interested in what people's thoughts are about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evi. I think you're absolutely right. As academics, we jump from one project to another, and having an opportunity to really reflect on what we've learned is so important. And this is such an important topic, and we've learned so much from that evidence synthesis exercise. So I think this is a topic that is really good for discussion. It'll be really good to hear from people who have worked in similar areas before, and want to share their experience with us. I don't think this is specific to working in evidence synthesis in topics related to people with learning disability. So the support worker is relevant to lots of other contexts. There's such a big focus on research in social care at the moment. So I think this is definitely something that we should be thinking about. Now, Evie, while folks are thinking of their questions and comments, so in your conclusion, the first thing you ask is, should we have support specific reporting guidelines to capture this? So it would be good to hear your views. Where do you think we should go from here?
Uh, I think that, yes, I think that available guidelines perhaps might not be able to capture the complexities of this relationship. Um, and, um, and I do think that at least specifically adjusted versions of existing perhaps guidelines are needed. Another point that I didn't include in my questions, but I have been thinking about it, um, is whether clearly, as you can understand, there was a single individual now supporting all the PPI members. There was not a support worker for each PPI member. And I'm also wondering how this might play out in the involvement of the group. So I think that there are like a number of issues that came up with this work. And I do think that these need to be further explored at least. And the development of specific reporting guidelines might be one of them as well.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, we've missed something here, because like you said in your presentation, we think about the support worker as a vehicle to facilitate
Yeah.
us to get information from the person with lived experience, but actually they are part of the lived experience, aren't they?
They clearly have an influence on the input that we get from the people with lived experience. Um, and I think that Olivia, you were the PI of this project. I think that at the beginning, when we first embarked on this project, we weren't thinking about this at all.
No.
We weren't thinking about how the support worker would influence the process. Um, so I'm glad to have this time and space to reflect a bit on what happened on this project,
Yeah.
and hopefully it might be useful for others who are doing PPI in the context of their research, including support workers or carers or translators, or yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there are various potential groups of mediators.
I agree. Now, I don't see any hands now. I'm sure you guys don't want to end up just listening to Evie and I chat all day. Really keen to hear from colleagues who, especially if you're doing evidence synthesis in the social care context. I think this is just so relevant, um, and also general PPI in evidence synthesis. This is something that I think that we're still it's still evolving. There's still a lot that we can learn and develop. So, Evie, you use the realist synthesis. So that was a realist synthesis, and you talk a lot, I think, about um, some of the features you pulled out, and you. So I think you identify them as the mechanism part, the mechanism aspect of the realist synthesis. So, do you think there has to be further methodological development in how we conduct realist synthesis in this context?
Yeah, and I think that there is a lot of methodological development going on at the moment when it comes to realist synthesis. Um, I have actually just been asked to participate in a Delphi study of a project aiming to understand better how quality is appraised in studies included in realist reviews. So I think that there is a lot happening in this sphere. Um, and there is a lot happening in qualitative evidence synthesis more broadly. Um, can I just ask, and people can raise their hands, their virtual hands, who has done even one realist review in the past? Who has experience with realist reviews here? And who has experience with involving patients and the public in their research?
Oh, okay, interesting. So
It's interesting, yeah.
not as many hands as I expected to see. That's really interesting.
Okay. I see a comment in the chat box about someone who has done realist reviews, including PPI.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I would be
Okay,
curious.
Rachel has her hand up. Rachel, it would be good to hear from you because I know you work in this area as well.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You've both done a great job in keeping things going when we've all been horribly silent in the background. So I'm sorry. This was really interesting, Evie, and thank you very much for raising it. I was fascinated to come along because I recently did some training, in fact, in realist synthesis because of needing to understand how it differentiates from mixed methods evidence synthesis in different ways. And I have to say, I came away from there thinking there are obviously differences in conceptually and the underlying sort of foundations in the approach and indeed the questions that you're trying to address. So I don't dismiss that, but actually a lot of the techniques I thought, crikey, there's quite a lot of overlap here. So when I think about our stakeholder engagement and PPI work, I was thinking we can borrow quite a lot from the sort of the methods of realist synthesis, but also it gave me pause for thought about how we write those things up. And I've long been concerned about the nature of our involvement of people and the public, patients and the public in the work that we do, because I, like you, even not thinking about it in a realist synthesis mindset, think that very often there's data collection involved and an intervention almost, because I was looking at the sorts of things that you talked about in terms of, the role of the mediator. Educating is something that we do routinely as part of trying to bring everybody up to speed, about the nature of the topic and what we're actually trying to achieve. Now, we might not do that terribly well, and we certainly don't have the resources very often to do it as well as you have in this context. Possibly in a lot of cases where there are sensitive topics, we do have sort of interpersonal mediation, for example, where we might have involvement of services, or I'm thinking about childhood cancer as one particular example, where we might have had people who were there to try and help facilitate the engagement at those meetings. And I'm not sure that we can honestly say that we've done the systems work and been very efficient in terms of time, but anyway, that's a different matter. But it made me think, your last question about the sort of research role of that sort of mediator. And indeed, I've been thinking about this more broadly about our stakeholder involvement generally. In some ways, and this isn't just for realist synthesis, I think it's for everything, this can only work in terms of power dynamics if we think about it in the context of everybody being equal, and everybody having a responsibility and a role, albeit different responsibilities and roles, in delivery of that project. And so I don't know if this is where you were getting to with that question, but is there a reason that you can think of why, for example, we can't name and formally acknowledge that individual and their role and perhaps more broadly thinking about the people that we involve? I mean, sometimes we name those individuals as well, either in the acknowledgements, or sometimes they end up being co-authors on papers. And so I was interested in your thoughts about power dynamics and whether that was just sort of, relevant to this population and to this group, or whether it was a broader issue, because I think there's a broader issue there from an evidence synthesis perspective.
Yeah, and I think that you're totally right. I mean, stakeholder involvement applies to all forms of evidence synthesis, mixed methods reviews, quantitative reviews, qualitative reviews. What I think is that I think that I'm not exactly sure whether responses of the PPI members are somehow filtered by the person intervening the relationship. What is the influence of this person to the information that we get? Because at the end of the day, we want to hear the voices of people with intellectual disabilities, or of any kind of group that our work relates to. But on the other hand, it is true that the mediator's role, at least in our project, expanded a lot compared to what we initially were expecting. Because at the beginning of the project, we did assign a research role to the support worker. We talked about them being a project body and supporting the members' involvement throughout the project. And we talked about the specific tasks that this would entail. It would entail briefing them, having like a face-to-face meeting a week before our meetings, briefing them about topics of discussion, and then be available to answer any questions after the meetings. However, what I was trying to discuss in this presentation was that this quickly expanded in ways that we hadn't anticipated, perhaps. The support worker took on various roles, and something that I didn't perhaps discuss a lot, these roles were sometimes conflicting because as you can understand, someone who is trying to make sure that time is used efficiently and the project sticks and the PPI group sticks to the project's agenda and so on is a bit conflicts a bit with the interpersonal mediator role, or even the educator role. Um, uh, and all these roles are assumed by one individual, not various individuals. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm just putting some questions there and some thoughts actually. I don't have the responses. And I'm not sure how things would have worked out if we didn't have a support worker. If the feedback from the group would be, if the group wouldn't have engaged so much with our work, or if the group's feedback would be more genuine, I cannot be sure.
It's really useful reflection. I mean, your support worker sounds amazing. I'm very envious that you had
That's
somebody
true.
so
Yeah, yeah.
fantastic on that project. I suppose it's just again thinking about our eternal concerns about sort of power dynamics and so on, and thinking how in a sense we're only honest brokers, right? We can only ever report what actually happened and our reflection
Yeah.
on it and so on. But it does make me wonder, is acknowledging the role of that person as part of the project team, the wider project team, in the same way as you could argue we would acknowledge stakeholders as part of the wider project team. Does that really change that relationship? And I think what you're saying is we're not really sure. It might do, but it's worth kind of reflecting on. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps, acknowledgement in publications, yeah, wouldn't change a lot, I guess. But authorship, for instance, what about authorship? I mean, for instance, the PPI co-applicant was included as an author in all our publications. Um, However, they were supported by the support worker throughout the project.
Mm.
The support worker was not included.
I'm guessing that felt wrong from your concern.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
perhaps, yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think there's definitely a lot more to be done in this area. Rachel, you talked about childhood cancer. I think there's some research done looking at the parents as proxies supporting children
Yeah.
in telling us their experience, but less so, I think, between a support worker and the person who needs support. So, and I suspect it's a very different relationship, and we'll learn different things from it. Um, yeah. So. Yeah, I think Evie, you've got the best title here. It's more than two to tango. I think this is definitely
Yes,
the
and as I
case here.
said, the support worker was involved because our PPI members were very clear about it at the beginning that they didn't want their carers to be involved in that. Um, because they felt that they might, override their voice. And they insisted on having the support worker supporting them throughout.
Yeah. Mhm.
Can I ask another question about that? Because that intrigued me, because I saw you had some carer, in your sort of final diagram. I saw you had a whole section on sort of carer
Yeah,
input and
yeah.
involvement. So did you have a separate carer group as part
No,
of
we
this
didn't.
project? So
No.
everything that you learned really came from those individuals. That's interesting.
You mean the program theory, the final program theory? The final program theory it was developed based on the literature, based on PPI input, and we also had an advisory group, which consisted of experts in the field, academics, and it also consisted of to adults with intellectual disabilities, the advisor group as well. So it is a combination of published literature, PPI input, and expert input.
Okay, right. So I don't see any other hands up, no more questions. Okay, well, in that case, I think what I'll do is I'll draw this webinar to a close. What I will say is if you're all involved in evidence synthesis and you've not been involved in working with patients and public during your project, I would encourage you to try and gain some experience in that. I think it's really important. As anybody working in evidence synthesis, you can't just think about the data extraction, the meta-analysis. It's really important to think about the question you're trying to answer and also the stakeholder input. So if you haven't had experience in working with patients and public who to try and support and inform and contribute to the research you're doing, I would definitely encourage you to try and gain some experience there. It's as Effie pointed out, it can be fun for both sides. It's not just purely for generating the piece of research. You learn a lot from it. So I want to thank Evi on talking to us today. It's really interesting. I mean, from a selfish perspective, it's a project that I was also involved in, and having a chance to just reflect and chat about what we've learned and how we would have done things differently. And also, what we still need to explore, what are the questions that we still need to try and answer. That's been really, really useful. And thank you all for coming along, and we hope to see you again soon. So I think we've got another webinar in the pipeline. So Alida and Sarah, can you please remind us when it is?
We've got plans to schedule another one in late September. We don't have a definite date yet, but the next one is likely to be late September. Give people July and August the summer off.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing you then. So look out for our communications. We'll be telling everybody about it. So thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.